The moment everything starts breaking, most people don't reach for weapons. They reach for manners. They apologize for standing too close. They ask before moving. They hold doors that should already be closed. Politeness feels like safety because it always worked before. That reflex kills people quietly. In the opening hours of collapse, helping feels right. It feels stabilizing. Information gets shared. Bags get carried. Directions get given. There's a brief illusion that cooperation will stretch normal life just a little longer. This is the last moment where kindness still runs on borrowed infrastructure. That phase burns out fast. Collapse doesn't erase empathy. It removes boundaries. Once boundaries vanish, help stops being invisible and starts being measurable. People notice who still has energy, who still has answers, who still moves with purpose instead of panic. Help becomes a signal, not of goodness, but of capacity. In normal society, helping is buffered by systems. Law limits retaliation. Reputation spreads slowly. Memory is externalized into institutions. You help someone today and the interaction ends. In collapse, systems evaporate. All that remains is proximity and unmet need. Need doesn't respect etiquette for long. The first danger isn't violence, it's pattern formation. You help once and nothing happens. You help twice and you're remembered. You help a third time and now you're reliable. Reliability under scarcity is dangerous. The fourth time you hesitate, your hesitation is noticed, not as self-preservation, but as betrayal. This isn't because people suddenly turn evil. It's because scarcity rewires priorities. When survival becomes uncertain, humans stop tracking morality and start tracking access. Who helped before becomes a potential solution again, and again, and again. Helping also steals something you can't replenish: momentum. Every conversation costs time. Every explanation costs attention. Every pause anchors you to a location that is actively becoming less safe. While you're assisting, the environment keeps moving, crowds thicken, resources thin, exits quietly disappear. The most dangerous conflict is internal. You feel the urge to stop, but guilt steps in first. You don't want to be selfish, you don't want to look cold. You tell yourself one more act of kindness won't matter. Collapse feeds on that delay. It doesn't need cruelty. It only needs hesitation. This is where survival paths split. Not between good and bad people, but between those who understand timing and those who cling to identity. Helping early is generosity. Helping late is exposure. The difference isn't moral. It's mechanical. The world doesn't fall apart because people stop caring. It falls apart because caring without calculation burns resources faster than reality can replace them. Kindness that ignores limits becomes unsustainable, and unsustainability is how people disappear without noise. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see where the survivors are watching from, and hit subscribe while you're here. Once help becomes visible, the rules change immediately. Not because people are ungrateful, but because the brain doesn't record help as an event. It records it as a resource. Relief, safety, and hope imprint far deeper than words ever could. Those feelings don't fade when the moment passes. They wait. In collapse, emotions don't stay abstract. They harden into expectations. This is how dependency forms without anyone planning it. You give water once and nothing feels wrong. The next day, they return because yesterday proved a solution exists. You share food, and now your supplies are part of their mental map. You offer shelter for one night, and suddenly leaving feels like abandonment, not movement. None of this requires malice. It's biological behavior under uncertainty. Humans seek stability when everything else dissolves. If you provide even a fragment of it, people will orbit you instinctively. Dependency becomes dangerous because it steals flexibility. Your movement slows, your decisions shift. You begin calculating outcomes based on other people's readiness instead of your own safety. You delay exits because they're not ready yet. You stretch your supplies to cover more mouths. Quietly, your survival plan stops being yours. This erosion happens subtly. There's no dramatic turning point, just small adjustments that feel reasonable in isolation. One more night. One more share. One more explanation. Collapse thrives on incremental compromise. The second danger is scale. Dependency never stays local. One person tells another, not as betrayal, but as reassurance. They helped us. They know what they're doing. They're prepared. Information spreads faster than hunger, and it always moves outward. Soon, people you've never met are making decisions that involve you without asking. At that stage, refusing help feels cruel. Saying no feels like a violation of an unspoken contract you never agreed to sign, but continuing becomes heavier every day. This is where many people break, not from violence, but from pressure. Pressure to be consistent. Pressure to be reliable. Pressure to remain the person others need you to be. Collapse doesn't punish generosity directly. It punishes predictability. The moment your help becomes expected, it stops being a gift and turns into a managed resource. Once people believe they can plan around you, your autonomy starts to dissolve. This is how good intentions turn into obligations, not imposed by force, but by assumption. Survivors learn a painful truth here. Help that creates dependency isn't neutral. It's a delayed transfer of risk. The danger doesn't disappear. It simply moves closer to you and grows heavier over time. Those who last understand that independence must be preserved before anything else. Without it, every act of kindness becomes another link in a chain you'll eventually be expected to carry, until it pulls you under. Dependency doesn't look like danger at first. It looks like community. By the time it reveals its cost, leaving is no longer easy, and sometimes no longer possible. There is a precise moment when helping crosses a line, and it almost never announces itself. No shouting, no threats. Just a subtle change in posture, a pause that lasts half a second too long, a look that stops being thankful and starts being evaluative. You feel it before you understand it, the instant when gratitude drains out of the room and calculation takes its place. This is the moment people stop asking and start assuming. They assume you'll say yes again. They assume what you have is shared. They assume your time, your space, and your energy belong to the group now. Assumption is heavier than demand because it doesn't feel negotiable. When you hesitate, the temperature drops. Not into violence, but into tension. Tension is the staging area for everything worse. At this stage, help becomes leverage. Past kindness gets replayed like a receipt. You helped before. You said you cared. We're counting on you. These aren't threats, they're anchors. They tie yesterday's choices to obligations you never agreed to carry forward. You didn't sign anything, but the debt feels real anyway. Trying to explain makes it worse. Explanations invite discussion. Discussion invites persuasion. Persuasion under scarcity always favors numbers over individuals. Every sentence you add narrows your options. The more reasonable you sound, the more trapped you become. Language becomes a net you tighten around yourself. This is how people get stuck helping until escape is no longer clean. They wait because leaving now would feel wrong. They hope conditions will stabilize. They tell themselves one more act of kindness will restore balance. Collapse doesn't restore balance. It redistributes pressure until something breaks, and it usually breaks the most visible support first. There's a biological component people underestimate. When stress is prolonged, humans switch from social reciprocity to resource acquisition. Gratitude fades. Memory shortens. Need sharpens. What mattered yesterday doesn't matter today if hunger, fear, or exhaustion are louder. The shift isn't moral. It's mechanical. The dangerous part is that this transition feels unfair. You remember the help you gave. You remember the risks you took. You expect that to count. Collapse doesn't keep score. It doesn't care about fairness. It only tracks current pressure and available solutions. If you look like a solution, pressure flows toward you. Survivors recognize this moment early. They don't argue it. They don't try to repair the mood. They disengage before resentment forms, before expectations harden, before help mutates into control. They leave while gratitude still exists, because gratitude is the last clean exit. This doesn't make them cruel. It makes them accurate. They understand that kindness has a window. Miss it, and kindness turns into obligation. Obligation turns into risk. Risk compounds quietly until departure becomes confrontation. Helping isn't the enemy. Timing is. And once that moment passes, continuing to help doesn't save lives. It trades yours for the illusion of virtue. In collapse, illusions are expensive, and accuracy is the only thing that still pays. The moment help becomes visible, you stop being a person and become infrastructure, a fixed point in a collapsing system. A node where resources, answers, and expectations pass through. People don't need to hate you to target you. They only need to notice that others rely on you. Notice that you still function while they're degrading. Notice that when pressure rises, eyes turn your way. Visibility is lethal in collapse. When systems fail, fairness stops mattering. People don't debate what's right, they calculate what's faster. Open help paints a shortcut on your back. It signals that planning can be skipped, adaptation outsourced, and effort reduced. That's not cruelty. That's efficiency under stress. The brain chooses the path of least resistance, and visible helpers become that path. The escalation is quiet and predictable. It starts with questions, harmless, curious, polite, then requests, then assumptions, then irritation when you hesitate. Not because you're wrong, but because you broke a role they assigned you without asking. You were useful. Now you're inconsistent. Inconsistency under scarcity feels like betrayal. This is where violence is born in real collapses, not from criminals kicking doors, but from disappointed dependents, from people who believed your help meant protection, leadership, or obligation. When that belief collapses, it converts into anger fast. Anger doesn't need ideology. It only needs a target that used to work. Helpers also attract observers. People who never needed help before now know where to go if they do. They file the information away. People with fewer morals notice patterns faster than the desperate ones. They don't rush. They watch. They map who helps, when, and how often. They wait for fatigue, not failure. Helping openly also locks you to geography. You stay near those you assist. You return to the same corners. You repeat routes. You keep schedules without realizing it. Predictability builds a map. Maps get shared. Shared maps get used. Eventually, someone shows up who isn't asking. This is why survivors erase themselves from maps. They stop being the obvious solution. They stop becoming the place where needs converge. They stop fixing problems in public. They understand that the safest position in collapse isn't central. It's peripheral. Not invisible, but uninteresting. Not hostile, but unavailable. Peripheral doesn't mean isolated. It means optional. It means people can solve problems without you. It means your absence doesn't break a system because you were never the system. Survivors avoid becoming load-bearing kindness. Helping isn't wrong. Helping publicly is. Once attention attaches to your behavior, it no longer belongs to you. Attention is a claim, and claims get enforced when pressure rises. In collapse, anything that doesn't clearly belong to you can be taken. Time, space, supplies, and eventually control. The people who last understand this early. They help quietly or not at all. They leave no pattern to follow and no role to occupy. They let others adapt instead of orbit. They choose positions that don't invite management by strangers. Because in collapse, being useful in public is not a compliment. It's a countdown. Survivors don't abandon helping. They redesign it. They strip it of performance, emotion, and permanence. Help stops being something you do and becomes something that happens briefly, cleanly, and without residue. The goal is no longer to feel useful. The goal is to remain functional. They understand that help doesn't have to look like charity. Charity creates memory. Memory creates expectation. Expectation creates obligation. Instead, help becomes information, timing, direction, or absence. The safest help leaves no trace and no name attached to it. Knowledge is the cleanest currency. It doesn't deplete, it doesn't reveal inventory, it doesn't require follow-up. A direction given once doesn't anchor you to an outcome. A skill shared doesn't demand repetition. You can teach someone how to purify water without handing them your filters. You can explain a route without walking it with them. Knowledge lets people solve their own problems without orbiting yours. Survivors also help indirectly. They leave tools where they'll be found instead of handing them over. They fix things quietly before others realize something was broken. They open paths and remove obstacles without being present for the gratitude. The best help feels like luck to the receiver, not rescue. This kind of help preserves anonymity. Anonymity preserves freedom. Another rule survivors follow is variation. They never help the same way twice. They don't establish routines. They don't help on schedules. They don't become the person who handles that. Consistency creates identity. Identity creates obligation. Obligation turns into pressure the moment conditions worsen. Help is also never allowed to compromise mobility. The instant helping requires staying longer, waiting for someone else, or returning to the same location. It stops being help and becomes an anchor. Anchors feel stable until the current shifts. Then they drown you quietly. Survivors accept refusal as neutral, no explanations, no apologies, just a closed door where help used to be. This feels harsh to people trained on peacetime ethics, but collapse doesn't negotiate with feelings. Explanations invite persuasion. Persuasion under scarcity is pressure. Pressure escalates. They also learn to separate compassion from proximity. You can care deeply without staying close. You can feel empathy without sharing resources. Emotional engagement doesn't require physical commitment. Survivors internalize this early because they understand that proximity is the most expensive form of kindness. Most importantly, they help only when the math works. When risk is minimal. When exposure is low. When exit remains open. When the cost is capped and the benefit doesn't compound back toward them. If any of those variables fail, they disengage without drama. This isn't coldness. It's calibration. Anything else isn't generosity. It's gambling with your lifespan. Collapse doesn't reward people who meant well. It rewards people who managed their limits precisely and stayed alive long enough to matter. Survivors help in ways that don't echo. That's why they're still here. The final lesson is the one people resist the longest, because it cuts directly against how they were taught to measure themselves. Sometimes the most humane act is leaving, not arguing, not explaining, not fixing one last thing. Leaving while leaving is still possible. This isn't abandonment, it's triage. Collapse creates situations where needs exceed solutions. Not temporarily, structurally. When that happens, effort stops being a bridge and becomes a drain. Every calorie spent, every hour given, every risk taken produces less return than it costs. Someone always pays for that imbalance. Survivors decide, early and quietly, that it will not always be them. Walking away feels like failure at first, like betrayal, like cowardice. That reaction is conditioning. You were trained in a world where staying was rewarded, where perseverance was praised, where presence equaled virtue. Collapse breaks that equation without asking permission. The rules change, even if your emotions lag behind. Those who last understand that survival is not a performance. There is no audience handing out moral points, no record that remembers who tried hardest. There is only continuity or absence. You either remain capable tomorrow or you don't. They leave before resentment forms, before help becomes demanded instead of requested, before gratitude turns into leverage. They exit while doors are still doors, not barriers reinforced by expectation and fear. Leaving early feels wrong. Leaving late is often impossible. This timing matters more than courage. Most people don't get trapped because they can't leave. They get trapped because they waited for a cleaner moment that never came. They hoped clarity would arrive. Collapse doesn't clarify, it compresses. There's a quiet brutality to this truth. Survivors often carry guilt longer than the dead carry blame. Guilt lingers. It replays scenes. It asks, what if? But guilt is survivable. Hunger is not. Infection is not. Exposure is not. Survivors accept the burden they can carry and discard the ones that will kill them. Collapse doesn't require villains. It only requires people who stay too long trying to be good in conditions that no longer support goodness as a strategy. Moral injury doesn't come from leaving. It comes from realizing too late that staying was never going to save anyone. The moment helping others becomes a death sentence isn't loud. It isn't marked by blood or shouting. It's marked by obligation, by the feeling that you can't leave without permission, by the realization that your kindness has turned into a cage. That is the window closing. Those who live learn to step through early. Not angrily, not dramatically, without speeches or explanations. Just movement, just distance, just accuracy. Accuracy isn't cold. It's honest. And when good intentions run out, honesty is the only thing that still keeps you alive.